Lawyers, has there ever been a time the opposing counsel accidentally proved your case for you and what happened? My favorite is a story from Jerry Spence. For those who don't know, he is a famous trial attorney. A witness on the stand was claiming that he had suffered injuries to his arm because of a city bus accident. Jerry asked him to demonstrate to the jury how far he can lift up his arm after the accident. The witness makes a feeble effort of lifting his arm. Then Jerry asks the witness to demonstrate to the jury how far he could lift up his arm before the accident. He lifts his arm much higher. The jury laughs. The case is over. Not a lawyer, but took my Bill's landlord to small claims court. He's on SSI and I'm his conservator. We sued her for over $4,000 after she just decided she didn't like him and changed the locks on his apartment door. She also stuffed all of his belongings into trash bags and dragged them out to the curb. This was all done the day after she cashed his rent check. It all started because she was letting herself into his apartment with no notice and was going through his stuff while he was gone. When I found out about this, I told him to let her know that was not okay. He did, and that's why she kicked him out. I'm very organized, and presented the judge with a folder containing photos, receipts, short videos on DVD and the sheriff call logs, as well as a concise timeline of events. The landlord showed up with her son and countersued for the exact same amount we were suing them for, claiming that the apartment was trashed. There were holes in the walls and they would have to repair everything before being able to rent again. During the hearing, the judge asked for evidence of the damage to the room. The son whipped out his cell phone and showed a video panning and walking around the room. The video showed my Bill's apartment obviously still being lived in. His stuff was all still there, and no visible damage, but there were a lot of posters and things hung on the walls. When the judge looked at the video he asked, "Where is the damage?" The son replied, "You can't see it. It's behind all of the posters." The judge frowned and looked at the video again, and then said, "Did you take this video when he was still living there at this time?" The son replied, "Yes." This was the clincher. The judge then asked, "Did you ask his permission to enter the apartment to take this video?" Silence. We were awarded the full amount. This should be a lot higher up. I'm glad your brother is safe now. Domestic violence case where the husband beat the wife senseless. Landlord tried to evict wife for breach of lease due to the beating. Landlord claimed wife violated lease terms by allowing police to be called to property and causing a disruption. My argument was that as a domestic violence victim, wife is covered under VOA and the property is HUD subsidized. Also MD law offers DV protections too. Landlord's counsel during his opening talked about how my client was beaten and the police were called in an ambulance, etc. I just stood there looking at him. When he finished, judge asked if I had anything to say. My response, "No, Your Honor. I believe opposing counsel has said everything that needs to be said." Judge smiled and ruled in my client's favor. Landlord can't evict DV victim. That landlord sounds like a garbage human. I worked as an intern for a lawyer. Construction law, in France, are quite strict in regard to the neighboring of historical monuments. The city was denying a permit for heavy modification of the house of our clients. They were arguing that because you could see the house from the church's bell tower, modifications were impossible. As a support, they kindly linked us to a 360-degree picture from said bell tower. We, as kindly, pointed to them that our client's house was, indeed, not visible from the top of the church. Building permit was greenlit the following day. Not a lawyer, but I am a former insurance fraud investigator. We were at a hearing before the WCB. I had something like 18 hours of video spread over a 2-week period of a claimant doing roofing work. The problem, for me, was that the video didn't get a clear face shot. Normally what we like to do is get in close, show the face for a positive identification and then zoom out. Bonus if the claimant was wearing distinctive clothing that could easily be tied to him. Because of where this guy lived, all I could do was show someone who matched his description getting out of a truck registered to him every morning. He wore a hat, he had a beard, and he had neither at the hearing. So the company lawyer is prepping me and basically letting me know to be on point because the claimant's attorney is almost certainly going to challenge the fact that it is his client in the video. If the video got tossed, the case was lost. About 2 minutes into the hearing, claimant's attorney agrees to stipulate to the fact that it is his client in all of the video. All of it. Our attorney was shocked. That was pretty much the only leg he had to stand on. Claimant attorney was incredibly smug right after this, like it was no big deal. Evidently, his strategy was to show that his client wasn't really a professional roofer since he was doing the roof the wrong way. He tried to get me to answer questions about roofing. I refused as it was beyond the scope of my work, and he just wouldn't let it go. After about an hour of back and forth over this, the judge finally said, "Counselor, it doesn't matter if your client is doing the work well. What matters is that he has stated, numerous times and under oath, that he cannot work. Whether he's doing it for free, for cash or for fun has no bearing on the fact that he's doing roofing work while collecting compensation benefits which he was awarded because he couldn't do roofing work. The guy lost and had to repay a bunch of benefits. After a few of those hearings, I began formulating a list of lawyers I would never hire and ones I would absolutely want on my side. I worked for a pie. Some of our most lucrative work was surveillance of personal injury claimants. One guy was supposed to be unable to remove his surgical collar from around his neck. We got some great footage of him doing so, and sporting a rich, deep suntan. I had to go to court over a financial dong up when I was a student. Took advice from the university legal support team who said I didn't need a solicitor, so I went in alone. The judge didn't like this and postponed it for another date so I could prove I'd had more counsel first. The other party's solicitor caught me outside the court and said, "I didn't tell you this but," and pointed out a huge error in the financial paperwork that made it very obviously come out in my favor. Went back to legal support, got confirmation that it was right, went to the second hearing alone and got the entire thing thrown out. The other solicitor winked at me as he left. Saved me about £9k. Nice chapter. What a great act. That lawyer solicitor had every right to argue their case and try to win, but instead made sure a kid didn't get screwed. A+ person. I had a misdemeanor possession case I was defending. Client was driving his mom's car. He gets pulled over for playing the stereo too loud. There are pills in the center console, in a prescription pill bottle. The bottle has his mom's name on it. Client gets arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. Case is obviously bulls, but the dumbest I've ever met in my life won't dismiss. We go to trial. During closing arguments, the judge says this case is a circumstantial evidence case. During my closing, I slapped the jury instruction on the projector that says if a case is based on circumstantial evidence and there is one factual scenario that points to guilt and one that points to innocence, the jury must find in favor of the defendant and acquit. My client was acquitted. When I first started, my firm had me on a case where the client claimed he lost because of ineffective assistance of counsel, basically saying that the old lawyer didn't do his job. So we prepare an argument based on not asking the right questions, not communicating, etc. We think it's going to be a tough case, but not unwinnable. Then we get the response to our complaint where the old lawyer argues that he was only ineffective because he didn't have time to prepare for the case and only reviewed it the morning of the original trial. He had known about the case for months, by the way. The judge saw this, and during the trial we had essentially asked, isn't this the definition of ineffective counsel? Not giving enough time to your client. The silence from his side of the court was amazing. Needless to say, the trial didn't last much longer than that. Thanks opposing counsel. I guess you were ineffective for both of you. I once had a district attorney indicate to the court that if defense counsel had included this argument in his motions, it would possibly be a valid argument. I interrupted him with the page number and heading where it was located. I was an attorney for the estate of a husband defending against claims for money by the separate estate of a wife over proceeds from the sale of a business back in 1996. Both husband and wife died in 2010. Suit was filed early 2011. Went to trial in 2014. Wife got around 10% of the business in 1996. Husband got the rest. He had built and operated it for 35 years prior to marriage and sold it 7 years into the marriage. The whole case hinged on whether the valuation of the business in 1996 was reasonable or not. We say you can't value a business 15 years later with all the documents gone and all the main people in the business dead or missing. They say they have enough info to show the 1996 valuation should have been higher. Opposing counsels gets a big time expert to testify that the business sold off $45 million based on a valuation, but should have sold for $70 million, and the husband hid $25 million in real estate in the transaction. We get that testimony and then realize the 1996 valuation of the business was done by the same expert. This is the absolutely most perfect catch-22 I have ever seen. So now we ask, okay, so was your valuation wrong in 1996 or is it wrong now? Expert says his 1996 valuation was right based on the information he had in 1996, but his valuation now is more correct. Which then bears the question, what information do you have now that you didn't have in 1996? Answer: I don't know. I don't have my file from 1996. Nobody keeps documents that long, and despite this lack of records, his valuation is somehow more correct now. Judge basically said the expert was talking out of both sides of his ass and we won. When I first started practicing, I handled a custody case where my client, mom, had a problem with dad smoking around the kids. I asked him if he regularly smoked around the kids, to which he replied that he doesn't smoke tobacco, only weed in the house. Obviously this raised eyebrows as it is illegal in my state. He then went into a long diatribe about how he only follows the law of the streets. He actually said this, and doesn't recognize the authority of the court he was currently in front of. Needless to say, mom got full custody, especially after dad was arrested for going to the court services officer's house late at night and trying to kick her door in. My public defender wife, not a redditor or I'd get her to speak for herself, was trying a case where the defendant was accused of filling fraudulent prescriptions. Now keep in mind, PDs deal with a lot of shady characters who maintain their innocence with increasingly implausible stories as the evidence gets worse, so you can get a bit jaded after a while. But you don't have to believe your client's story to represent them vigorously. So the prosecution has grainy surveillance video of someone who looks like the defendant getting the prescription filled and the ad used to fill it, which belongs to the defendant. Defendant maintains that someone stole his ad and is using it because they look similar, but never reported the ad as stolen. Wife is skeptical that the jury will go for that, but she's always willing to go to trial if that's what the client wants, so preps that defense and heads into trial. Prosecutor brings in the pharmacist who reported the prescription issue, goes through the usual routine of establishing who she is, where she works, was this the ad used that day, etc. Finally, the prosecutor asks the pharmacist if the person who attempted to fill the prescription that day is in the courtroom. No. Oops. Did the judge immediately dismiss the case? My opposing counsel made some off-the-cuff remarks about how their client had to go to another remote office to get all the records they wanted to use against my client. That let me know the witness they were trying to use to introduce the records as evidence wasn't actually familiar with the records or the records keeping process. In the jurisdiction we were in, records were exception to hearsay rule, but you needed someone familiar with the creation and maintenance of the records to get them admitted. I attacked the witness qualifications to get the records admitted and ended up getting the records excluded. I then made a motion for a directed verdict on the grounds they couldn't prove the case without the records and won. All because the opposing counsel complained that their witnesses had to go way out of their way to get records for the court. I had a hearing where the opposing party offered an updated contract that my client supposedly signed, except it was a horrible copy and barely readable. Then he assured the judge that the new contract was exactly the same as the old contract, except for the party name at the top. The original contract was in his mom's name, the new one in his name, and the date of the contract itself. He made that assurance multiple times, after he exhausted himself saying how everything was the same. I then pointed out to the judge that half the provisions were different and that my client had never signed that form. The judge asked if we were really accusing him of forging my client's signature, since that's a serious accusation. I held up the guy's prior conviction for contract fraud and said I absolutely am. Your Honor, we won. Hands down. No further argument needed. Row. Those guys were either incredibly stupid or stupidly confident in their skills of trickery. Lawyers of Reddit, what are some interesting laws loopholes? In Oklahoma, if you are an adopted child, you will be considered an heir of both your adoptive parents and your biological parents after their death. Double inheritance. In South Dakota, if you ride a horse to school and the temperature is below a certain point, the school is forced to house and feed it. False. There are neither schools or horses in either of the Dakotas. As a lawyer, I'm going to give a serious answer, which may not be super interesting to the layman, but is an example of a true loophole. In Australia, as in most developed countries, we have a set of laws designed to stop company management from improperly fleecing the creditors of limited liability companies. So, for instance, if your company is going down the tubes and so you decide to simply transfer all of the company's assets to yourself, or if you keep running up debts you could not possibly pay, then you can be held liable. In order to be held liable for the above, the company's liquidator needs to be able to prove that the company was insolvent at the time you engaged in the improper conduct, which necessarily requires analyzing the company's financial records. If the company never kept financial records, which is itself a breach of the law, then insolvency is presumed, to avoid company directors being able to avoid liability in that way. Now for the loophole. The above presumption only applies if your company did not keep or retain financial records. However, the instant your company is in liquidation, the equivalent of bankruptcy in the USA, a company director ceases to be an agent of the company. So if they take the company's books and destroy them, then the presumption of insolvency does not apply, since it was not the company that destroyed them. You can be prosecuted for the destruction of the company's books, but it's basically a slap on the wrist fine in practice. So long as you can live with that, it means you can get away with virtually any unlawful conduct you engaged in while running the company. The above may not be something that pops up every day, and it may not make for great party conversation, but it is a rather gaping loophole that makes a huge difference to a director's responsibility in Australia. Posting a sign saying you aren't responsible doesn't necessarily make you not responsible. For example, say a dry cleaning shop posts, "Not responsible for lost or damaged clothing." My favorite are the gravel trucks that have a sign on the back stating "Stay back 200 feet, not responsible for broken windows." How many people actually believe that? In Michigan, if A sues B and secures a judgment for money damages, these are the rules on what B can keep. All family pictures, all arms and accoutrements required by law to be kept by any person, all wearing apparel of every person or family, and provisions and fuel for comfortable subsistence of each householder and his or her family for 6 months. B. All household goods, furniture, utensils, books, and appliances, not exceeding in value $1,000. C. A seat, pew, or slip occupied by the judgment debtor or the judgment debtor's family in any house or place of public worship, and all cemeteries, tombs, and rites of burial while in use as repositories of the dead of the judgment debtor's family or kept for burial of the judgment debtor. D. To each householder, 10 sheep, 2 cows, 5 swine, 100 hens, 5 roosters, and a sufficient quantity of hay and grain, growing or otherwise, for properly keeping the animals and poultry for 6 months. E. The tools, implements, materials, stock, apparatus, team, vehicle, motor vehicle, horses, harness, or other things to enable a person to carry on the profession, trade, occupation, or business in which the person is principally engaged, not exceeding in value $1,000. In Texas you could keep your house in bankruptcy, no matter the value. Then one of the Enron guys claimed the homestead exemption on a $15 million house. The feds made them change the law after that. I regularly tell people there is no magic number on a DUI charge. While there is a legal DUI limit to 8 in the states, above which you are automatically considered impaired so long as the reading is considered valid and admissible. Most states have laws which allow any amount of alcohol in your system to qualify for the charge if the state can show the amount, no matter how low, sufficiently impaired your ability to operate the vehicle. Here we have DUI, driving under the influence, and DWI, driving while intoxicated, as, basically, separate laws. The first requires a 08, the second requires a showing you were intoxicated to a point your ability was sufficiently lessened. Fun fact to throw out at the local bar: when someone starts talking about how they had 3 beers and are below the legal limit, and therefore won't get a DUI as a result. I work at a petrol station in the UK. If you fill up your car and walk into the shop without a suitable means of pay, forgot your cash, Card doesn't work. We will give you an IOU form and you are not legally required to come back and pay the balance. We can send you a maximum of 3 letters and that's it. It would cost us more for court costs etc to get the cash off you. Sorry I ain't pertaining to ARP's lawyer answers, but I thought you would find this useful. I read in a book once that there is an outdated law in Alberta that hasn't been changed. This was a few years back though, that if you are released from jail you can demand a loaded gun and a horse to ride out of town. Anybody know what happened to this one? My boss homebrews beer, and he found out that in Texas, if you brew the beer yourself you can legally consume it even if you are underage. You can even buy all the needed equipment while underage too. My boss homebrews beer, with a beginning like that. This comment could not possibly be bad. Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on, and did you? My mother said that at a law firm she used to work at many years ago they had received a call from a gentleman that wanted to file a lawsuit against Walt Disney. When asked why he was filing suit he claimed that the Disney characters were coming out of the TV and stealing food from his refrigerator. They told him they'd take the case for an advance fee of $100k and never heard back from him. Lawyer for 12 years. Client was charged with stealing a mobile toilet. After we won he told me he still owns it. The sucker has the thing in his backyard because he was lazy as frick. His office was nearby. Forced him to deliver it back at night. Jesus. Still offended that he lied to me the whole time. Client wanted to sue because there were no strawberries in her fruit salad which she bought from a supermarket. Thankfully a secretary was able to screen the call. She asked if the packet said it had strawberries, and the response was, no, but I thought it would have. I don't know how these people manage to make it through life. My father is a patent attorney, and when I was around 14 he told me about a guy who wanted to patent the iPhone 3 because aliens had given him the design for it. My father told him that if the aliens originally designed then they were the ones that had to patent it, not him. Freaking genius. I'm a prosecutor, so I don't get hired to represent anyone. I work for the government, but I do have discretion over how the prosecution progresses. That is, deciding to proceed, deciding what to offer in the event of a plea bargain, deciding to withdraw the charges, etc. I had a case a few months ago where a man was charged with shoplifting. Turned out he was 70 years old, had absolutely no criminal record, and had shoplifted a sandwich which he ate politely in the store. He honestly thought he had paid for it. I was so angry that he was ever charged in the first place. When I saw him in court, he was absolutely terrified. I withdrew the charges and wished him well. I have no idea how it progressed that far. I had a client come in saying that he needed to sue Stu for robbing all his checks. When I asked him if Stu had a last name, he said no. When I asked him if he knew any Stu, he said no. When I asked him what proof he had that Stu was robbing him, he showed me all of his pay stubs. There were clear, monthly deductions by Stu. As soon as I saw it, I knew. I asked, do you have children? He said yes. I then told him your Stu is the SCU, the support collection unit. They take money out of your check to pay for your child. He left the office insisting that we needed to find Stu. That's just really freaking sad. I did insurance defense for a long time, including insurance fraud investigations for insurance companies. You wouldn't believe how many people take a video inventory of their house only to have it mysteriously burned down the next day. You really can't fix stupid. Woman wanted me to sue McDonald's because their employees beat up her son, who was trying to rob the place. Reminds me of the other Galadvis thread where a parent was asking about suing a girl who had punched her son and broke his nose. But looking through the poster's history, it was clear that the son had been punched while attempting to sexually assault the girl. When I was in law school I did the criminal defense clinic where we help a public defender. I say help because they just give you small cases to do by yourself. I had a guy accused of shoplifting a yellow Fubu shirt. Guess what he wore to the trial? A gosh darned yellow Fubu shirt. I asked the prosecutor to re-offer the plea deal. She did, and I convinced the guy to take community service and probation. If I remember correctly, our public defender system is tragically overworked and underfunded. But a guy who has an abundance of yellow Fubu shirts is less likely to shoplift another. Probably too late here, but I was a civil rights investigator. We had one guy complain that he was fired from his factory job because of his race. He was black. Owner of the factory said it was because the guy was smoking crack on his lunch break. Turns out he was smoking crack on his lunch break, but so were a few of his white co-workers, and they were not fired. The owner agreed to pay the guy 6 months of back pay and give him a neutral reference. That sounds like a really fucky case. Technically he was wrong, but technically he was correct. I was working in a law firm and got a call from reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to her conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and one half of a pair of scissors, so I guess a scissor. She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis, aliens stole her pets, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it and that she had rights as an author automatically on creation of the work. I told her the most useful thing she could do is ensure she had evidence of her creative work, and that she should send a digital copy to herself and a friend, and also leave a copy with a friend. That way if it was published without her consent she could prove it was her work. We spoke for nearly an hour. She thanked me and then left. She got free legal advice, and I didn't get stabbed with a scissor. I hope she found the help she needs. A lady in prison in my state tried to sue the State Department of Corrections for holding her against her will. Her lawyer wouldn't touch it. It takes a special kind of stupid to try that. I had a teacher that worked for a major video game publisher, one of the top 10 ones. He told me that when people tried to sue them for small amounts due to some game being bad, they would just pay whatever the person wanted. It was cheaper than dealing with a country's terrible justice system. Except one day a guy sued them because a game was bad. He was a law student, self-representing, and tried to throw the book at the company. They decided to make an exception for this guy. They instead threw the book back at him. The lawsuit kept escalating until both sides wasted lots of time and money. Then as final stroke, they offered to settle in front of a judge. They're in front of the judge. They put the price of the game on the table in cash and told the guy to just take it and stop bothering them. The judge thought it was very fair and told the guy that if he refused that settlement he would be fined. Guy was very unhappy. He expended like $5,000 in bureaucracy and airplane fares to get $60. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently this pissed off his ex-GF. The ex-GF sued him for custody of their 2 cats and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats because she claimed they were service animals. Hint, they were not at all service animals. Guy I know worked for the DPP and told me about a case where a guy was up on car theft charges, which is like 5 years max, but he was very likely to get a suspended sentence probation as it was a first ever offense. The dumbass though, thought it would be a good idea to go and intimidate the witness into not testifying. The witness called the cops and had CCTV footage of this, so he copped an extra charge with a 20-year max, and there was no way in heck he was getting a suspended sentence or probation on that one. Not a lawyer yet, but this happened while I was doing my 1L summer internship. I worked at a law library in a county lockup. There were plenty of interesting stories. One I already posted, but I figured I would share another. I also have no privilege issues. An inmate was charged with felon in possession and was coming down almost weekly to do research. He was basically looking for a way to get rid of a Walmart receipt and video, which indicated that he had purchased a box of bullets, giving officers cause to search and find the weapon. One day, he brings in one of the law books he purchased and had reviewed. He pointed to the section that discussed reasonable expectation of privacy and argued that the officers had not asked his permission to view the video and thus had invaded his privacy. I pointed to parts of the book that explained reasonable expectations. Still wasn't getting it. Finally, I asked him who owned the video. Walmart. Then wouldn't it be their decision? But it's me in the video. Whose video is it? Rinse and repeat for about 5 minutes before he finally huffed off. A lady once called asking us to sue her neighbors. They were using voodoo on her. Fortunately, she had psychic powers and thus knew what they were doing. I respectfully declined. Voodoo only works if you believe it does. Just tell any targets to stop believing in it, because believing gives it power. Without going into too many details, had a guy that wanted to bring a class action against the company that made his underwear, because he was convinced his underwear was the reason he had a crooked dong. He assured us that as soon as the jury saw his dong, they'd side with him. No, we didn't take it. I worked as a receptionist at a small personal injury firm and was the first line of defense against the more outlandish cases. One of the most ridiculous calls I took involved a woman wanting to sue her cat's veterinarian for malpractice because her cat scratched her, which in turn supposedly caused her liver to fail and a slew of other health problems to her eyes. She believed the vet was at fault because she was convinced the cat was carrying some obscure disease and the vet had failed to catch it. It was my second day on the job, so I put her through to an attorney, not yet knowing what else to do with such a ridiculous situation. She got a firm sorry, can't help you from our office, in part because we did not do malpractice, veterinary or otherwise, but also because she sounded like a one-way ticket to crazy town. A good secretary receptionist who knows how to keep the crazies out of your office is worth their weight in gold to attorneys. When one of the older partners in my office retired, there was basically a bidding war for his secretary among the younger partners who didn't have an experienced secretary. I am a personal injury lawyer in the UK. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Honestly, if she could pay up front, I know plenty of plaintiff's side attorneys who would take that. Her money's as good as anyone else's. If she wants it on contingency, then frick that. A guy found a rock in the middle of Melbourne CBD that he believed came from an underground volcano, therefore he discovered the volcano and he owned the volcano and that the Melbourne City Council and indeed the Victorian government should pay him rent to live on top of his underground volcano. No, I did not take on the case. Fun fact, Australia is the only continent with no active volcanoes. Sometimes you have no choice but to take it. I represented a guy who sold and leased cars. A woman worked for a company that let her drive a company van to work as part of a carpool effort. She'd keep the van at home and picked up fellow workers to go to work, then bring them back to their homes. One day going to work, she was stopped at a stoplight. Some guy didn't stop in time and bumped into the van. She got out to look. She and the other guy agreed no damage, so each went on her way. Later, a woman who was a passenger discovered she was injured, went to a lawyer. The lawyer sued the company, the driver, and every passenger in the van. The lawyer deposed each passenger, got the name of their auto insurance company, sent a demand letter for coverage. One of the passengers said, "I don't have a car, but my sister does," so they sued the sister. She said, "I don't have insurance because I'll lease the car, and they provide insurance," so the lawyer sued my client and sent a demand letter for insurance coverage. One prospective client wanted me to sue Burger King for no longer serving pancakes. And now they are back at 3 for 89 cents. You must have put the fear of God into M. My dad is an in-house lawyer for a major American insurance company. He once spent an entire year trying to help deny insurance benefits for a painter who had stepped off his ladder onto a cat, fallen down the stairs and become paralyzed. The insurance company was arguing that a cat was a commonly expected occupational hazard for a painter and that he was negligent in not checking for cats before stepping down a whole year of his life over whether a cat is a known occupational hazard of house painting. Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most outrageous reason someone filed for divorce? My aunt was dating an unemployed dude for a while. He was staying in her house rent-free. They got married and were getting ready to go on the honeymoon when the new husband tells her he's not going because he has to take care of his plants at the house. Big fight. Aunt goes on the honeymoon with her sisters instead. She comes home and tries to kick him out of her house. He refuses to leave. She tries to get the police involved. Dude is live streaming on Facebook how he is being trapped in his own home. Police tell my aunt there is basically nothing they can do. Can file for eviction after a divorce. Dude gets to live in her house with his precious plants for like 3 months until everything legally gets worked out. Paralegal. A couple got divorced over a cat. Wife called cat Snowball because of white fur and only wanted the cat to eat wet food or chicken breast. Husband called cat Lily again because of white fur and believed it should only eat dry food. These two argued for a year over custody of the cat but did not give a crap about their human kids aged 15 months, 4 years, and 6 years old. Colleague handled a case where money was not an issue but the kids were. Neither parent wanted them. My mom worked in abuse and neglect counseling and juvenile justice. There are a lot more cases like this than I'd care to admit. Parents divorce and neither side wants a kid. Some of them are that neither side wants a kid but will fight over another kid. If ends up totally screwing them over because they have to live with the fact that their parents didn't want them. My aunt had a case where the wife had glued all of the outdoor hoses together so he wouldn't spend more time washing his vehicle anymore. When the glue didn't work she just cut them all up. When he bought new ones she filed for divorce. My 90-year-old client, the husband, and his son retained me to initiate divorce proceedings with his 88-year-old wife. They'd been married 60 years. The wife had recently taken to beating him with his own cane because their daughter poisoned her into thinking he was hiding money from them. The battle came down to husband and son versus wife and daughter. At their first court appearance, my client showed up in an old 1950s style pinstripe suit and fedora. He was a farmer his whole life, and this was clearly the only suit he owned. He was such a meek and lovely old gentleman. I had to pass my client onto a new lawyer midway through the proceedings because I accepted a job in a different country, but I understand the divorce was eventually granted. Not a divorce lawyer, but I had a friend whose parents divorced for irreconcilable differences over time spent playing EverQuest. In my game design class, it was referred to as EverCrack. I've been aching to tell this story for a while. So this girl I went to school with marries this rich guy from Ohio. She moves in with him and they seem to get along well. 6 months later she files for divorce. Up to that point, all I've heard from her was how good it was going. Anyways, it turns out our buddy had a fetish for going off on urine. He asked her to urinate on him in the tub. At first she agrees to it as she thought it was a one-time thing, but he kept asking for it more and more. She tried to decline it respectfully but he wouldn't get any of the hints. She finally used the tub being too small as a reason. Next day she comes home with 24 construction guys and their heavy equipment tearing the bathroom walls. A week or so later, they finish up the bathroom. She comes home to a sign left on the fridge with a note to drink up. She got some watering to do. I don't know what exactly she put down as the official reason in the paperwork, but that was definitely her biggest reason to walk out of that relationship. Oh, I forgot to add, he also wanted to bring a horse to do the deed as well and at times asked her to make animal sounds while she stood on top of him. She comes home to a sign left on the fridge with a note to drink up. She got some watering to do. The thread above this made me sad, but this one picked me right up, dying of laughter. My grandfather's brother was a judge who presided over state issue marriages from time to time. One couple he married returned 6 months later to confirm the wedding and end their trial marriage. When he thusly informed them that there was no such thing and that they had been married for 6 months, they subsequently broke up. That sounds nutty, but if you believed you so when they told you trial marriages were a real thing, the betrayal could very easily end a marriage. My dad was a divorce lawyer. He had a client who wanted to divorce her husband for 2 reasons. 1. He did not have enough hair on his chest. 2. He did not drive fast enough. Keep in mind this was in the 70s when chest hair was a bit more important. Crap, yeah, it would have been embarrassing to show up late at a pool party and your man not having a decent chest bush. I didn't like her anymore 2 days after being married. In sickness and in heath, till disinterest do you part. She was kidnapped in Mexico and he refused to pay ransom. Eventually her family managed to pay and she was left on the side of the road. It is not outrageous as in petty, but outrageous as how absurd that is. "Honey, I love you, but we agreed to save up money so we can purchase a house. Your ransom would really set us back." I knew a guy from a high school job who divorced his wife of 2 months because she would sleep with a nightlight but he could only sleep in total darkness, as they apparently never lived together until after getting married. He hated her nightlight so much that he would often sleep on the couch instead, but sometimes he would claim the bed for himself and lock her out of the bedroom for the night. This was an eccentric late 40s man working at a Burger King who acted like all the other high school co-workers were his best chums, and often told us these weird stories. I'm glad I don't work with him anymore. He had an argument with the new in-laws during the wedding and moved out at around 5 AM during the first night. Man, I was going to say that our client was served divorce papers for sending a couple $100,000 overseas in a scam, but dang, you guys got better ones than me. Dang, you are too stupid to stay married to. I was a legal assistant when this case came in, but this lady divorced her husband of 2 months because he got her an iPad case for her birthday instead of the expensive jewelry she wanted. Failed exorcisms. Client had an inner ear condition that caused chronic vertigo, but symptoms could be treated with medication. Husband was an evangelical who was convinced his wife 1 had become possessed and that her vertigo and general crankiness with his methods were evidence of demonic possession. 2. The medication she was taking was enabling the devil to hide inside her. And 3. The only proper recourse was exorcism. He would hide her meds until she got dizzy and then try various methods of exorcism. This included sweating it out, put under blankets while incapacitated and locked in a room full of space heater, freezing it out, pretty much the reverse with AC, fans, and bags of ice, surprising it out. He would jump out and scare her like it was the hiccups, but instead of yelling boo he would recite the Lord's Prayer or Psalms. The final straw was that he tried to surprise it out of her by pushing her down the stairs when they were heading out for dinner. Note, this guy was some type of executive and they still went out to dinner after the stairs incident. She asked for the divorce at an Applebee's that night. I have often tried to picture that conversation, as she was adamant that he was a total sweetheart and never acted out of malice or anger. That one's just sad. My uncle has schizophrenia, and my grandaunt tried to convince my grandmother, his mom, to have an exorcist come instead of letting him stay on his medications. It's probably one of the reasons my grandmother stopped talking to them much. It pains me to think he could have gone through all of that if he'd been one of my grandaunt's son instead of my grandmother's. My client put his wife in an assisted living facility based on a misdiagnosis, the medication of which caused the wife to be unable to care for herself. While in the facility, my client shocker started dating another woman and methinks began using hard drugs. He used a loot of money on both of these things. She eventually got off the medication and got better. Suffice to say, she was not happy about what had transpired. The medication of which caused the wife to be unable to care for herself. Oh my god, that is freaking horrible. I'm an intern but the judge I work for used to do divorce work. He has some crazy stories but this one is probably the most outrageous, though the divorce was pretty justified. Every morning this couple would sit in the bathroom together while one of them had their morning dump. One would sit on the toilet and the other on the rim of the bathtub. This particular morning the wife was on the toilet and husband on the edge of the tub. They started to argue about their relationship so the wife reaches down, pulls her tampon out and flings it at husband. I'm told the tampon stuck for a brief second to his forehead before sliding off. He filed for divorce that same day or the next. At first I read this as one shoots in the toilet while the other shoots into the bathtub as in they are both pooping simultaneously and rock paper scissors for who gets to use the toilet. I was so concerned. I had some friends get divorced because she legit hated Dale Earnhardt and he legit hated Jeff Gordon. Wasn't the reason but did happen during the course of the divorce. Neither side would follow the court orders. When they had to go back to court they were fighting over a pistol and the man's grandmother's bowls. I assumed for weeks that these bowls were some sort of heirloom or expensive china. When they finally brought the bowls in to swap they were freaking Tupperware. My douche cousin told his wife she had 3 chances to give him a son. Daughter was born first. Strike 1. Son was born second. Then they find out the boy can't eat gluten. So my cousin divorced her and has made zero effort to see his kids. Not me, but a friend. My mum has divorced her husband because his mother still coddled him at age 40, with his consent. They lived with his mother, common in Asia. By coddle I mean that she would walk straight into their room after his shower and powder his back for him. They couldn't lock their bedroom door because his mother would come in as and when she wanted. If they locked the door, she would knock repeatedly asking what they were doing. LOL, what would they be possibly doing? Playing poker? My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD, which manifested primarily financially, so he made their lives a penny pinching heck. Examples: he was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times and you had to get one square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than one square. Wife finally got fed up and left him when 1. He gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2. Their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. My mum had a friend with a horrible penny pinching father. As a child they took cold baths with 1 kettle full of hot water added, etc., etc. When he died and they went through the house, it was filled with hidden cash, bills behind the baseboards, bills in fake drain pipes. Needless to say, he was severely mentally ill. I worked as a paralegal for a divorce lawyer. Case analysis was one of my main responsibilities. I crap you not. A recently married couple of 2 years broke it off because the husband would not stop feeding the dog. The dog got outrageously fat. Apparently she saw connection between the dog and future children. It's always so sad when people overfeed animals. The dog will always be happy to get treats, and I think the tiny instances of validation and affection a person gets because of it are enough for them to ignore what they're doing to the poor animal. It definitely does suggest the person in question is irresponsible when it comes to other living creatures that depend on him to keep them safe. I am a lawyer that handles quite a few divorces, among other things, and I've seen all sorts of reasons for marriages ending. The only thing that is consistently true and relevant to this question is that it is never for just one reason, and it is never one-sided. In fact, I've started telling potential clients in our initial interview that I am well aware that I am going to uncover some dirt on my client in the process, not to scare them, but to put their mind to ease that I've seen worse. The fact that you haven't been 100% an angel up to this point doesn't scare me, and I'd rather find out about it from my client beforehand than later on from their spouse at the worst possible moment. All this is just to say that when you hear about people divorcing over one stupid argument or mistake, usually that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. That said, some of the lighter straws I've seen include a guy who is 100% convinced that his wife, our client, is actually a lesbian in love with his sister and just using him as a cover. But he also claims she is having sex with me to pay for her legal fees, and with every male whose phone number is in her call history. A woman who is divorcing my client because he was too sad after his father died last year. My client had to break down her door to get his father's ashes a few weeks after he left the house, and she refused to let him back in or give them to him. And a woman who claims my client was emotionally abusive towards her because he refused to yell at her and sat in silence ignoring her when she screamed at him. He has this recorded, time-stamped for the dates and times she insists the incidents occurred, and she's listened to them and his complete silence as she goes on tirades and insists this proves her point that he was emotionally distant and abusive. Not the most outrageous, but I had a client incur about 20 additional hours of billable hours because he and his ex-wife were battling and went to trial over their Star Wars collection. This was the only issue at trial. They were able to work out custody, child support, the house, but the Star Wars collection went to trial. The judge ended up splitting it in the most sholish way possible, basically giving each side half of what they wanted and then mixing and matching everything else and breaking up collections. When speaking about it at a conference, the judge admitted she did it because if they were going to act like children, she would treat them like children. The thing is, the value of this collection was over $100K, so hardly kids stuff. Neither side had it in them to appeal, nor was the case law on either side given judicial discretion in property distribution. Lawyers police of Reddit. What is the worst way you've seen someone incriminate him herself when they were actually innocent? A woman came into the shop where I was working and tried to pay with a fake €10 note. The cashier noticed straight away and told her that he'd have to keep the note and that it couldn't be accepted as payment. She became really indignant and said that she had received the note in her change from our shop the day before. She insisted that since we had, allegedly, given her the note, we had to accept it as payment. Eventually the police were called. An officer arrived and we explained the situation. We were all annoyed that this woman was making such a big deal about it. The officer asked her if she had known the money was fake before she tried to pay for things with it. She said she knew. I didn't steal her jacket. I was only holding it so I can't hit her better. Maybe not robbery, but definitely assault. I did no hit her. I did not. Here's a tip. Whatever you do, don't be a sarcastic smartass. They will take it as a confession. My cousin was at his older brother's college party, and it goes so rowdy that the police came to break it up. The music is off, and they've rounded everyone up, and the cop asks, "Okay, who here has been drinking underage?" He raises his hand without hesitation. He was the only one. I know a guy that went to a party to find his friend. He was 21 and everyone there was 20 or younger. So just as he's searching for his friend, the cops rolled up. They tried to get him with like 40 counts of furnishing alcohol to minors. He fought the charges and won. The judge even made the officer responsible apologize. Haha. I'm a law student, and a professor told us today about her worst one from when she worked as a public defender. Apparently, a convicted felon was riding his motorcycle when he saw a cop issuing a traffic ticket to someone else on the side of the road. He pulled over his motorcycle, walked up to the cop, and said, "Excuse me officer, I'm a convicted felon and have H in my pocket." As his public defender, she asked him why the heck he would ever do that. His answer? Well, he was gonna catch me eventually. Maybe he wasn't referring to that specific cop when he said, "He was gonna catch me eventually." Maybe he's an intuitive addict that realized there was no getting away with a life of crime. Maybe it's Maybelline. I dunno. Officer, I don't sell drugs, I do drugs. Unless you wanna buy some drugs. Saw a guy arrested for possession of marijuana and I think some oxycodone or something. At first appearance, the judge reads everyone the usual spiel about how first appearance isn't the time to litigate your case and to not talk about the facts. He gets to this guy and explains what he's been arrested for. The guy says, "Marijuana? Nah, I ain't had that. I just had them pills." Get dispatched to a domestic violence call. Female said her husband punched her in the face and the ribs. Female has multiple scrapes and marks on her face and ribs. My partner asks if he hit his wife and he says yes. Partner asks him why he punched her in the face and ribs, meaning what led to the physical violence. Guy says, "Well, I was punching her in the face but then she covered her face. So I had to work the body so she would drop her hands. Then I went right back to the face." He explained this as he mimes a Mike Tyson-esque bob and weave. Greatest confession ever. Ugh. This is what happens when you combine good logic and a bad person. Not innocent, but stupid nonetheless. We were all drinking in a hotel room one time and got a little too loud. Almost everyone was over 21 but one of our friends was still only 20. A cop showed up to give a noise complaint and asked how old we were. Everyone said 21 or 22 except our friend who said 16, so the cop looked at him real strange and said he needed to check his ID. He looked at it for a second and said, "This says you're 20. He replies, "I know sir, I thought I would get in less trouble if I was under 17. The cop tells him, "You're real stupid boy, you know that," and told us to quiet down. My law professor had a client who was an accused drug dealer. He paid his bail in dirt-stained small bills his wife brought to the courthouse in 4 plastic shopping bags. Never did find out if they admitted to evidence. Oh, I have another story. This one is my own. So I got this call stating a security guard caught 2 people having sex in a car in a supermarket parking lot. I get there and find 2 cars parked next to one another in a semi-secluded space, one matching the description I was given. I roll up behind it with my lights all on and spotlights on them. I figured it would be an easy "you're both dumb, go home" type of call. Nope. As I walk up to the car, the guy is stumbling out of the passenger side pulling his pants up. I see him start to dig into a backpack in the seat. That's a big no. So I start shouting at him to show me his hands. He doesn't listen, so I shout louder. He jumps and then I hear clink. At this point I'm thinking, oh frick. I look at his feet and there lays a crack pipe. The guy and girl were obviously not there for just sex. I ended up finding insane amounts of cash and a variety of drugs and paraphernalia. The guy would have just gone home if he wasn't a jittery moron. He got the girl charged much higher than himself in the end since it was her car all the crap was in. And I thought it would be an easy day. My friend was speeding and saw a cop turn around for him. So he went faster to try and get to an exit to get away. Ended up getting pulled over by another cop. The cop asked him what he was doing in such a hurry and he said trying to get away from another cop. Yeah, he got a ticket. Dunno if this counts, but when I was training as a PPO my trainer told me about a guy that ran for no reason once. A Hispanic male was pulled over. He had no license or any proper documentation. It's so common here that many officers just write tickets and avoid deportation. Anyway, when asked for his license the guy freaked out. He waited for his chance and then took off on foot. That prompted a whole chase that eventually included K9. The officers didn't know why he ran and it's generally safe to assume someone who runs is dangerous. So K9 gets in there and he does something to pee the dog off. The dog chews off his calf muscle. When asked why he ran the guy just said he was scared. I don't know if he was charged. I doubt it though. It was a crappy situation. Not a cop or a lawyer, but a security guard. They're these two people on the property I was overseeing. Not illegal and they cooperated when I asked for it to note who was on the property after hours. When I went back to my booth, and they then proceeded to slash the tires and break the windows on my patrol car, all the while saying I can't arrest them because I am not a real cop. I guess they forgot I had their names, ID numbers, license plate number, and faces documented and on camera. They were arrested 8 hours later. Sweet justice. I've heard about the old DUI gotcha when the response to recite the alphabet backwards is I couldn't even do that if I were sober. But I don't know if that's just an urban legend or not. It sounds like something one might reasonably say in response, though. It's legit though. I have never done it in my life. I can't do it sober or otherwise. I mean, I don't even know if that guy got it right. None of these stories are about innocent people. I've noticed. I'm still having fun though. About a year ago my friend had come out to the club with us. He was underage, but had one beer. On the way back home he was driving. His girlfriend in the passenger seat and her older brother was in the back seat. Both of the passengers were drunk, especially the brother. He started punching him in the back of the head while he was driving, trying to be funny. So my friend swerved the car quickly left and right, as to jiggle the car I guess, not swerve lanes, to make the brother stop. I guess he didn't see the cop car behind him, and got pulled over. The cop must have smelled the beer on him and ended up conducting the regular sobriety tests. I think he ended up failing the preliminary breathalyzer, so they arrested him. In jail they gave him the actual chemical test. Turns out in court that the test resulted in a .00 back level, so he would have gotten off no questions asked. But he says that while he was talking to one of the officers in jail, they were acting all friendly and asked him, so you didn't drink at all? Not even only beer? And he replied saying, well yeah, just one beer. Statement was brought up in court and bam, he was found guilty. This was his second offense having to do with underage drinking, so he got his license suspended for 6 or 9 months, not sure, and had to do community service. So yeah, don't fall into a cop's trap. I'm gonna break these cuffs. I'm gonna break these cuffs. Ugh. I used to do computer work for a police station, and one day, when I was working on a PC, a cop was at another computer listening to his recording of an interview of a person and writing up a report. This person had crashed into a parked car, was able to drive a bit farther but had to abandon their car and walked home. The police went to the owner's home early the next morning and interviewed her. I heard this. Police: okay, so you hit the car and came right home. Did you stop anywhere first? Suspect: no, I came straight home. Police: did you have anything to drink when you got home? Suspect: number. Police: nothing at all. Suspect: number. Police: so you didn't drink any alcoholic beverages between the time of the accident and when we arrived at your home? At this point, I said to the officer listening to the recording, say yes. The officer said, "She is not very smart." Suspect, "No, nothing at all." Police, "So why did the breath test show a .11? Suspect, "I have no idea." As a firefighter, we once rolled up to a car accident where this kid about 17 years old had run into the concrete pillar under a highway overpass. Car was totally wrecked. Kid's arm was broken in 3 or 4 places and was bleeding pretty bad. The first thing he said to me when I got up to his driver's side window, "The car is not stolen. There is no reason to call the cops." Normally people say stuff like, "I'm hurt bad" or "Get me out of here," but not this guy. He just kept repeating "The car is not stolen" over and over. We called the cops. My brother didn't exactly incriminate himself, but he sure made himself unpopular. He was DJing on a party boat when they got raided, just as the police were boarding their boat, and he claims he didn't do it intentionally, having only noticed the police after the record was spinning. He played out KRS-One sound of the police and, of course, a fair number of the party goers were joining in with the whoop whoop. The police were not amused, taking it to be a deliberate attempt at humor at their expense. Record got taken off. My brother got an earful. Your brother is a hero, accidental or otherwise. There was a case years ago where a man had been accused from breaking into vending machines and parking meters. The constantly denied the charges and had his bail paid in coin. Hey man, he was just a simple coin collector. Lawyer, since the accident, have you done anything else to alleviate the pain? Plaintiff witness, I smoke weed every day. This was during a deposition and was not admitted before the jury because it was scandalous and impertinent. My sort of stepdad failed a roadside sobriety test. He was taken to the county jail where he registered 0.0 back because he hadn't been drinking. I watched this happen. His lack of coordination is legendary. I was once pulled over in a crappy neighborhood. Being of a race that was not endemic to the area, the police asked to search my car. Stupidly, I was young and foolish, "Get off my nuts," said yes, and then jokingly added, "Remember though, this is my mom's car, so any crack is hers." Second search, canine search, and intimidating personal search all turn up nothing. I learned never to speak to the police and all it cost me was a little dignity and a few constitutional rights. Saying you have C is probable cause for search. To be fair, the police go to comedy clubs for jokes. They don't pull you over for a laugh. Wrote a book called If I Did It. I'm a criminal defense attorney and this happens much more often than you think. And, every time it happens, it is the worst time. That is, if you care about justice. To be sure, it happens in the interrogation room, but more often it is part of plea negotiations. Whenever there are co-defendants, you may find yourself with a prosecutor who just needs one or some of them to take the weight. Sometimes, the discovery tells you who the heavy is, but a lot of times, it's up for the co-defendants to decide. If Aaron's death has taught this country anything, it should be that sentencing guidelines and prosecutorial discretion put defendants in impossible situations that led to desperate decisions. This was not only true with Aaron but also hundreds of thousands of mostly poor, uneducated people every day. So, I have seen sons take a hit for their mothers, girlfriends for boyfriends, and every other possible permutation. Many times, these people are not squeaky clean themselves, but they are also not guilty of the crimes they plead to. That's why you don't say anything until your lawyer tells you what to say. I am a traffic cop in the UK and we were filming for one of these Road Wars Police Interceptors Traffic Cops TV shows. As a part of the show, they ask us to do some filming of pulling people over and doing routine stops. So we decide that the next car to go through the set of lights we are currently at will get pulled over and we'll record what we do as part of a routine traffic stop. So this guy goes through in a normal manner and we follow behind. Pull him over in a safe location and we all pile out of the car. I'm walking over to the driver's side and about to explain to the guy that we're filming for this show and they just want to see what happens during a routine stop check. He rolls down the window and immediately, before I could even say a word, blurts "It's in the glove box." With a puzzled look on my face, I ask him what's in the glove box. "The drugs," comes the reply. So I detain him, cuff him and put him in the back of the traffic car, and my colleague and I search the glove box and find a substantial amount of H. When asked back at the station why he admitted the offense, he said he saw the two police cars. One was a backup car, and all the yellow jackets of the camera crew and thought the game was up. If only he knew. Technically he was actually innocent because he hadn't committed an obvious crime up until that point. In traffic court, guy stands up. Judge says your officer isn't here. How do you plead? Guy starts explaining things, about to go into self-incrimination. Judge interrupts him and points out again that the officer isn't here. Someone next to the guy pipes up with plead innocent, you moron. He then proceeded to plead innocent, and was a lesson to everyone else in court that day whose officer hadn't shown up. One of my friends had had a couple beers and was driving back home. A cop was pulled over on the side of the road ahead of him with its cherries flashing. My friend pulled up and over right in front of the cop. The cop came up to see if he needed help, smelled beer on him and gave him a DUI. He wasn't innocent by any means, but he wouldn't have been pulled over if he would have just drove on by. And I know drinking and driving is bad. I don't need to hear the lecture. It's just the only story I could think of, so I figured I'd share. Excuse me, so I don't know how you can associate with such a flagrant abuser of our country's laws. A friend of my sister's had already been ticketed twice by her college police for underage drinking. Her parents told her if she got ticketed again, they'd pull her out of school. So when the cops pulled her and her friends over one Friday night, she got the bright idea to flee. The cops caught her and cuffed her. So she ran again, this time managing to hide in the bushes and wriggle her way out of the cuffs. She stumbles home. The next day, the cops knock on her dorm room door. They ask for her by name, so she pretends to be her roommate. The cops give her a business card and tell her it's very important she contacts them ASAP. She flees her dorm room and spends the next couple days hiding in friends' dorm rooms, including my sister's, for a few hours. She gets phone calls from friends of hers. Apparently, the police are and canvassing the campus for her. They found her photo at a sorority house, so they know she lied to them. One of her sorority sisters finally convinces her to turn herself in. She gets charged with a long list of crimes, including several felony charges. Her parents decided to leave her in jail for the weekend instead of paying her bail. Once she gets out, she spent several hours combing the bushes where she'd hidden to find the handcuffs, since one of the charges was theft of police property. Why is this story relevant to this thread? Because the cop that caught her and her friends that night forgot his breathalyzer and let the entire group off with a lecture. You've been visited by the Good Sleep Kitter. Upvote within the next 3 seconds and you will be blessed with cozy and restful sleeps. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.